Hey, what's up? Welcome to the attic. Let's get into it. Judges chapter 6. If you are like me and because of all this craziness, you've got a little off schedule and floundered a little bit, and maybe you're still floundering with what you're supposed to be doing with your time and what it looks like to obey the Lord and not just sit back and wait, and you're wondering if he's getting a little tired of you, wondering if his patience is running thin, there's a good word for us here today that his patience isn't anywhere close to being exhausted. And we see it with his overwhelming patience with Gideon, who time after time is saying, God says to go and do, and he says, yeah, but, and is very reluctant to believe and act on the promises of God. So we get to see his response to that. There's also a good word for us here. If you're wondering, God, why have you derailed my plans? If you were on a track for a particular internship or career path or degree plan or summer plans or wedding plans, and you feel like God just turned everything upside down and you're scratching your head to think, Lord, how is this a part of your plan? There's a beautiful answer for us today of why God would change what looks on the surface to be a perfect plan, to make perfect sense to us. So let's take a look. Judges chapter 6. And if you remember last time, Gideon, before God had told him, you mighty man of valor, go and attack the Midianites. But before he could attack the big bad enemy of Midian, he had to start in his own heart and tear down idols and altars of his fathers. And what's cool is that this seemed to turn the tide in the hearts of these men in this town, where the worship of Baal has replaced the worship of Yahweh. And whenever Gideon knocked down the altar to Baal and Asherah, they were ready to kill him. His dad stood up and said, no, you let Baal contend for himself if he is a real God. And that seemed to turn the hearts of the men, because look in verse 33, chapter 6 of Judges. Now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east came together, and they crossed the Jordan and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But, okay, that sounded like bad news. Bad guys coming together. But, contrast, that means there's good news. The Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet. And usually, we've seen this with Othniel, when the Spirit of the Lord came on him, the deliverance at the hand of God immediately followed. But here, the Spirit of the Lord comes on Gideon, but deliverance does not immediately follow, because Gideon isn't finished doubting yet. So hang on to that idea. Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called out to follow him. That's the family, that's the clan of that area that were worshiping Baal, and now they came out to follow Gideon. They seem to have turned. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and they too were called out to follow him, and he sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they went up to meet them. So here, they're all rallying to follow Gideon, to attack the Midianites. And you think, Spirit of the Lord, they're all rallying. It's time to kick butt and take names and defeat Midian. But he's not finished doubting yet. Gideon is not. Verse 36. Then Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. Okay, that looks weird, those two things together, the word if and as you have said. If it's really going to happen as you have said, isn't that always a yes? Lord, if you said it, it will happen, but he's wrestling. Verse 37, behold, I'm laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. When he rose early the next morning, and squeezed the fleece, he wrung enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl with water. So here, Gideon, this isn't the first time. He has put a test before the Lord to confirm, you said it, but is it really true? And he says, let the ground around be dry in this fleece. Puts his blanket of sorts down and asked that it would be wet. And it wasn't just a little wet. Did you remember how wet it was? He could wring out and fill a bowl of water. So it was very clear this is no accident. Verse 39, then Gideon said to God, you would think Gideon would say to God, okay, you proved it to me. You've been more than gracious. I'm ready to go. No. Let not your anger burn against me. Let me speak just once more. Please let me test, God? Test just once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry on the fleece only, and on the ground let there be dew. So he flips it as if perhaps it was just natural phenomenon that made that happen. So he said, just to be sure, extra sure, can you do the opposite miracle? And we do this all the time, that God will make something very clear and we go, yeah, but maybe that was just random or a coincidence. Like we're praying, Lord, do you want me to break up with this girl? She feels a little bit like an idol in my life. And then you read, Josiah destroyed all the idols. And you go, that's got to be a coincidence. Maybe not. And you go on looking for another sign. We do it all the time. But here he does, and the Lord doesn't strike him down. Verse 40, God did so that night, and it was dry on the fleece only, and all the ground there was dew. Okay, so notice what is not said here. There is no commentary where it says, and God was angry because of the test. And it doesn't say God was pleased because of the test. So what are we to make of this? Is this a good way to approach the Lord and ask for guidance and direction and clarity? Or is it not? Well, it's intentionally ambiguous, so we have to wrestle with it. I'll give you the answer. The short answer is you got to obey the Lord. Now, here's what it says in verse 36. If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, that to me is very compelling. It starts with, if this is going to happen as you said, then will you do this test? So to me, it looks like in spite of the fact that he is very doubtful, God is incredibly gracious and forgiving and patient. So to me, the main point is not to lift up Gideon and say, look, this is a great way to approach the Lord. The main point of this is to lift up God and to say, even when our faith is weak, look at how patient our God is, even when he shouldn't be. And however, he does answer, so God and does do what Gideon asked. So the scripture doesn't commend it, but it also doesn't condemn it. It doesn't seem to encourage or directly discourage, but if you find yourself in a place where you're having trouble, you're doubting the Lord, and you feel a green light from the Lord to give him this test, to ask, then I want you to obey the Lord. But it's hard for me to get away from things like when Jesus said, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Or a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign. And that's not identical context, but all I can say is the text doesn't directly comment on it. So take all of that before the Lord. And I want to encourage you, if you're testing him because you don't trust the word, the question I have is, why is the word of the Lord not enough? Nonetheless, he's so patient with Gideon. Gives him this double flipped sign in addition to all the other encouragement and signs he's given him up to this point. And now he's ready to go out into battle. Chapter 7, verse 1. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod, and the camp of Midian was north of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand. Notice what just happened. They're about to go into battle, and God looks at the lay of the land, and he goes, Usually if you're going to say you have too many or too little to win, it's usually going to be you have too little people to win this battle. You don't have enough. But in fact, God says you have too many, which doesn't make sense to our brains. How can you have too many people? How can you have too much power to win a battle? How can you have too much of a strategic advantage to win the victory? It doesn't compute unless we consider how God works and the values of the upside-down kingdom of who God is and what real strength, what real power is, and what his ultimate goal is, which is to bring glory and honor to his great name, to his great name. See how it plays out. Verse 2, the Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand. And what's the danger here? Well, it says, lest Israel boast over me. That's what he doesn't want to happen. He doesn't want the Israelites boasting over God, saying, my own hand has saved me. This is about trust and about glory. He will not have us trusting ourselves and our own ability to save ourselves and giving glory to our own self that belongs to him. Now, verse 3, now therefore proclaim in the ears of all the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead. Then 22,000 of the people returned and 10,000 remained. That means they started with 32,000. And if you look over at chapter 8, verse 10, we find out that the enemy camp is 135,000. So it wasn't even that they had a majority. It was 32,000 good guys against 135,000 bad guys. But God said, still, it needs to be more of an surprising, more of a shocking victory. So he sent home first 22,000. Now there's 10,000. And the Lord said to Gideon, okay, that's thin enough. Go. No, he doesn't. The people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And now the way it describes it next, it's a little bit ambiguous exactly what's happening. Some people say he tells them to drink the water, and if a certain amount of people drink the water this way or that way, if they drink the water this way, they stay, the rest go home. Some people will say it's because this certain way shows which ones are more watchful and ready to fight. Other commentators argue it's actually the ones that are less watchful that God accepts into the army, which gives God even more glory because they're less capable. Regardless, it could be just an arbitrary thing. But the bottom line is God wanted to distinguish. And now, look how many are left. Look in verse 7. And the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men who lapped the water, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hand. Notice who does it. I will save. I will give. That's what God says. So he's going to get the glory. So the people took provisions, and they took trumpets, and he sent the rest of every Israelite man to his tent, but he retained 300 men. And the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Okay, now, the Lord is not finished giving Gideon encouragement. And I'm going to let you read that on your own, because what happens next is he says, hey, if you need more encouragement, go down to the camp, and he lets him overhear this dream where, first of all, he sees tons of people. That's scary. But then he hears a guy that hears a dream from God, and the bad guy interprets a dream to the other bad guy and says, this means the army of Gideon is about to destroy us because their God is awesome.